record button here.
Recording start.
All right. Okay, thank you everyone for coming, and I hope you're having a great conference so far. My name is Chris Millay, and I'm joined by
Dana Carlisle Kletchka.
And we're going to be here talking about iBeacons. There we go, there's our first slide. iBeacons in the museum. This is going to be a pretty informal session, I think, so I enabled audio for everybody, so if you want to jump in and go ahead and ask us any kind of questions, you can do that, or just send it in the chat window. We hope to make this fairly conversational. Also, we can go as technical as we want with this. We can go as deep into the museum side of this as you want. Dana and I both sort of cover those two sides of the picture, so we're just going to try to make this meet as much of your expectations as we possibly can. So do you want to do a full sort of introduction of yourself?
Let's see, I'm the Curator of Education at the Palmer Museum of Arts, and I also teach a little bit and have been interested in digital technology and sort of applications for social media and technology in the museum for several years now. And I feel really lucky that I am, working at Penn State with people like Chris, because while the museum has a lot of content, people like Chris have a lot of expertise that I definitely don't have. We essentially have been working together for several years and have really started working more closely together over the last year.
Great. And again, my name is Chris Millay. I'm the Assistant Director for Education Technology Services at Penn State. And our role is part of Central IT, so we look at new and emerging technologies, we research those technologies, and partner with folks like Palmer Museum and Dana to roll out these technologies and do lots of evaluation to determine if they're having the type of educational impact that we're really sort of seeking out. So that partnership has sort of had this particular application of iBeacons came about. I think the way to get started here is to turn it over to Dana to give a quick introduction to the Palmer Museum of Art. That's the location in question here.
All right, I just wanted to tell you a few little things about the museum, because museums are such unique and sort of location-specific spaces. The museum was built in 1972 and basically started out with a few hundred objects, I think, that had been collected on campus. And we had a remodel in 1993, and so we're much larger at this point. We're primarily an American art institution with works of art from about 1800 to the present. And then we also have some pretty nice collections in Southern and Northern Baroque, contemporary ceramics, Japanese prints, and then we do special exhibitions throughout the year, about 9 special exhibitions per year. And one of the things I really wanted to sort of cover, so that it's probably easier to understand why I was so interested in this technology, is that we are on the University Park campus with, 40,000 students?
43,000.
And most of the students who are walking around have iPhones. If they don't have iPhones, they certainly have some sort of smartphone, but for the vast majority of them, they are iPhones. So when adopting this technology, I was thinking about 3 main audiences that we serve, which is K through 12 audiences, university audiences, and the general public. But in this particular instance, I was definitely thinking of our university audiences the most. Thank you, Peggy, for posting that. When Chris and I started talking about the museum and what we do, I was most interested in using this as some sort of way to reach out to students first, and then I think as we go on, we'll see a little bit more about what we can do to make sure that this serves all of our audiences.
So Dana and I got together, it's probably about 9 months ago, and just had a kind of general conversation about ways that we can introduce technologies. What are some of the new emerging technologies that might sort of be game changers for the museum experience? And we bounced a lot of ideas around, and I'd actually selected, which works pretty well, I think, an iBooks-based, an iBook that delivered some really interesting sort of supplementary content for the museum. And it was sort of designed to be working on an iPad, and people could take that through the museum as they were kind of enjoying the space. Is there anything else you want to say about that particular?
Yeah, so for conversations with Chris, essentially two different kinds of projects emerged, and one of them was sort of an interpretive iBook. And I'm really interested in the notion of people curating their own experiences in the museum and then being able to share those socially. One of our biggest issues is that the museum, like a lot of museums unfortunately, is not wired yet. The campus has a campaign right now for universal wireless access, and we'll be part of that. So we should be wired next year, which is another reason why I'm sort of in love with this iBeacons thing. The content for that takes a lot of time because we selected works of art from each gallery that we're basically giving sort of interpretive information, biographical information, and then information that people can share with other people and hashtags so that they can create their own sort of experiences. But with iBeacons, which emerged a little bit later, the reason that I thought they were so wonderful is I envisioned them as a way of assisting wayfinding or being able to orient people to the space of the museum. It's hard to tell, but we actually have I'll answer that in just a sec. We actually have 2 floors on the museum that have works of art in them, and in my experience working with students and with the public, I've noted that there are a lot of people who don't realize that you can go up the 2nd floor stairwell, and that's sort of mortifying. So I viewed the iBeacons as a way of orienting people to the space, letting them know what was available, where they could go, and giving them very brief information about the areas that they're walking into. In terms of teaching people about hashtags, they're actually part of the iBooks, and I don't think that we'll need to teach people about them because mostly the people who are using them are university students and they already know about hashtags.
So we mentioned iBeacons a bunch of times. This technology, and I'll get into what exactly it is if you don't know. Yeah. Okay,
here we go.
We'll get into it, trust me. So we had that sort of iBook idea before iBeacons came out, and then fortunately, a couple months into the iBooks project, Apple released this new iBeacons technology. So I'll jump into that since we've said the word iBeacon about 12 times now. I'll tell you exactly what it is. And I think the best way to sort of introduce this idea is it's sort of under the realm of location-based technologies. And location-based technology that you're probably most familiar with is GPS, right? And GPS, we all use it. Probably the most common use of GPS would be sort of turn-by-turn directions. The GPS that's in your car that gets you from point A to point B. That's wayfinding, the kind of word that Dana suggested. But location-based technologies can do all sorts of other rich things for you. So whenever I travel to a new city for the first time, once I get checked into the hotel, one of the first things that I do is I fire up Yelp, and I look for great places to eat. I'm a very food-oriented traveler, and Yelp helps me find, based upon GPS, the closest thing to me that's really great, and a lot of times it finds those sort of out-of-the-way places that the tourists don't know about and really enriches my experience as I travel. And then I use the GPS on my phone to walk around the city streets and find those little nooks and crannies where these places are. And so it's not just about wayfinding, it's actually about the technology in a really substantial way, enriching your experience. The problem is that GPS is based upon what you're seeing here, this sort of swarm of satellites that spin around, orbit around the Earth, and basically if you're on the surface of the Earth, you're in line of sight, let's say 3 or 4 or 5 of these things at the same time, and through all those different signals you can sort of triangulate your position very, very accurately. And that's really great. Obviously we all use it, it works really well, but the problem is that signal is being pumped up from space down to the surface of the Earth, and by the time it gets to you it's really, really weak. And it's good enough for doing outside turn-by-turn type of location, but the problem is that signal, because it's so weak, doesn't really actually make it into a building. So all of the concrete and steel and everything that a building is made out of is blocking that signal. So you can't do GPS inside. And that's really a shame because interior spaces in a lot of places and a lot of institutions are fairly complex places. So this is a floor map of our Petit and Paternal Library here at our main campus. Fairly complex space. It's been added onto over the years, so there's weird sort of connection points that are awkward, multiple different floors, and we're adding new things onto it, and it's getting better, but it's still fairly hard to sort of find your way around sometimes. And we have librarians that their job is to help students find the resources that they need, and they do a really great job of that. But there's certain basic wayfinding things that need to be done here that can be really facilitated through something like GPS, if GPS worked indoors, if you could deliver that type of an experience indoors. This is I also concluded a floor plan of the Palmer Museum, and as Dana mentioned earlier, and she told me this, I was really surprised that a lot of people didn't understand that there was a second floor. And there's half of the museum is on the second floor.
Yeah.
So it's insane if they don't know about that. So these location technologies and wayfinding technologies can help expose things that people maybe wouldn't otherwise know about. So a little deep dive into the technology.
Are we going to get into that?
Beacons work a bit. Yeah. So actually, that's a good segue to the question about Android. This technology is actually not super new. What Apple did, as Apple tends to do, is make something that's been around for a while a lot easier and more approachable for people. So iBeacons are basically based on low-power Bluetooth. It's called BLE, and all it is a little tiny low-powered transmitter. That little green chip there, that's about the size of your thumbnail. And it's got a little watch battery on it, and these things are so low-powered that they last about a year or two on a single battery. So you can put these in place and sort of leave them there and forget about them for a long time. But they transmit this low-powered signal out. And the other thing that these things do is, switch to the next slide here, is sort of identify themselves. So not only can you, with a mobile device that's built to receive these signals, not only can you tell that you're near one of these beacons, you can tell, as you can see through these sort of concentric rings here, how close you were to the beacon. So I can tell if I'm right next to it, if I'm sort of far away from it. And then I can also tell which beacon it is. So the beacons identify themselves uniquely. So I can see that I'm near beacon 1, and now I've moved on and I'm near beacon 2. So it's not exactly like GPS where it can actually pinpoint my location, but if I've got enough beacons spread out through space, I can say, and I know where those beacons are, I can say as I move around generally where I am in a space. And typically in terms of wayfinding, that's good enough for what you need to do. Some of the early applications for beacons, obviously the marketing people, the retail people jumped on this right away. This is a picture of, say, I believe this is Macy's in New York City. So a big, giant department store, multiple floors, multiple different departments. And people like this are...
Sorry, can I answer this?
Yeah. Yeah. So low cost, yes, they're $5 a piece. That's probably a famous statement.
Yes.
So Macy's, for instance, is going to have a beacon in every single department, and each department is going to deliver relevant coupons, deals for the day, things that consumers might want to look out for in that particular department in a way that maybe wasn't really possible, and it's just sort of context aware. You have the app on your phone. You don't need to really do anything. These things run in the background, so you don't even have to have the app on. It's just sort of delivering this content to you as you're walking around and doing your thing. So it's really unobtrusive. Obviously, we're educators here, so we are thinking about technology applications. So we think in an active learning type of classroom, the individual group areas can have beacons attached to them. Even individual students, you can turn a phone into a beacon transmitter itself. So you can do interesting things like dynamic grouping, or maybe a learning analytics powered grouping that automatically creates dynamic groups based on high and low skill students, tells them to get together and uses beacons to help navigate them into their groups. So really cool stuff that you can do within a classroom space. And then obviously relevant to what we're talking about here is there is huge applications for beacons in places like museums. So you can imagine attaching beacons to every single individual piece of artwork or within exhibits, and then those beacons be attached to content, and that content be delivered to patrons that are walking around enjoying the artwork, and they get sort of interesting supplementary content or interactive experiences that enrich their space. And we'll get a little bit deeper into what we did in that space in a second here. Okay, so what Dana and I did as we kind of were having conversations about how we might apply this technology we started experimenting a little bit with building a iOS app that used iBeacons. Since I'm part of Central IT, we needed to have this solution work for the museum and other places on campus. So eventually this will be sort of broad value for students to download this to be used in eateries and classrooms and other places. And then they don't have to download a separate app for the Palmer Museum. They already have it. They don't even know that they have it until they walk into the Palmer Museum and they start to get all this really great content appearing on their device. So that's kind of neat and kind of a low barrier to entry for the students that are using this. And Dana and I can sort of bounce back and forth as I go through some of these design choices that we made or design requirements that we made as we were designing the app. But first of all, obviously we want this mobile. So we want it to be working, as Dana suggested, on the iPhones that a lot of our students are already carrying around with them. We didn't want to have some kind of lending area, and I know it's problematic for you guys to have that.
Yeah, we have a security staff, and we have volunteers who greet people when they come in. There's our docents on duty. They'll greet people and they'll take people through the museum. But we didn't want them to actually have to hand them something. We wanted this to be something that would just show up on their phone if they were interested in seeing it.
Yeah, so BYOD, that's a big bring your own device is a big thing within mobile strategies for institutions, and something that we sign on to as well. We don't want to be too prescriptive about what devices you use, and we don't want to have to deal with. We have across Penn State 100,000 students, so we obviously can't be buying everybody iPhones. So another design principle is we wanted to keep this simple. So the museum content, the artwork is front and center. That's the most important thing that we want patrons to be seeing. So we don't want a complex technology that's going to get in their way of just having that experience. We want to deliver that experience in a very seamless, intuitive way without having to have a lot of manual user interactions to make it all happen. And I'll talk a little bit about it later, but this is sort of what differentiates this from the traditional audio guides where you sort of look at the placard with the number and you type something in. This is all sort of automatic. Unobtrusive. The technology, as I mentioned, has to be simple and it's unobtrusive in that way, and that the interface is simple. But also the beacons themselves are very unobtrusive. I mentioned that they're only sort of the size of a thumbnail, and that was really important. Maybe Dana can speak real quick to the look of the museum and why we need to be unobtrusive.
I think both our director and the curatorial staff are really interested in having information available to people, but in any museum, the sort of aesthetics of putting up a whole bunch of different signs and all sorts of different little plastic things on the walls is a little. Do you want to answer that? That's definitely a concern. And so one of the great things about this is that you can hide them under a painting. You can actually put it underneath it if you want to. We have stairwells that have little glass decorative elements, and we can just stick them behind the glass elements and nobody can see them. So it's actually kind of, in a non-creepy way. So no, we have not used QR codes in the museum, and part of the reason for that is because because of our wireless situation, they don't seem to work all that well. I suppose we could, but we've been working so much on the iBook that's kind of where my time is going. I should also mention that I am the only educator at the Palmer Museum. I work with students and I have 50 wonderful docents, but I'm the person who is essentially responsible for this content. So yes, absolutely. And one of the things that we're talking about doing, once we sort of get this in place and really figure out exactly where we want to go with it, we have all sorts of ideas for our next steps. But yeah, no, we haven't been using QR codes just because I've been working on other things. And like I said, with the QR codes, we've tried them before, and they just don't seem to work in our particular space.
To answer the question, they are weatherproof. So most of again, because of the technology, it's so simple, it's really easy to build enclosures that are really pretty secure. So there's a lot of different people making these right now, and there's different price points for them, and different ones are different amounts of weatherproof, but they're really designed to be durable. And I'll talk about how simple it is to implement in a second as I show how this sort of application works a little bit more. So real quick to get through some of these other design principles, we wanted this app to be location-driven or context-driven. What that means is the app should be aware of where you are. You shouldn't have to tell the app where you are. And again, this is the difference between those old audio tours. You needed to tell that little box where you were. This app knows where you are. So in a way, we can drive this entire experience while the device is in your pocket, because zero user interaction is required. And this is really a different way to design a user experience, which is almost like a non-existent user experience. The experience is the content. The experience isn't interacting with the app. It's all location-driven. It's all driven by whatever beacon you're closest to at any particular moment.
We're also encouraging people, and we can talk about this in a second. We're encouraging people to put their earbuds in, and essentially you put your phone in your pocket, and when you walk in, the content that's closest to you just pops up on your phone.
Yep. This needs to support wayfinding. So one of the things that, as Dan has mentioned, is that there's conscious choices, there's real deliberate choices about how things in the museum are laid out. And while we want to support people being able to navigate non-linearly, however their interests guide them, we would like to at least suggest a particular way of going through the museum.
And we also, from my perspective, I want people to get a sense of where they are. Sometimes people will walk through and they'll say, okay, so they call the bottom floor the religious paintings and the ceramics, and the top floor is the new stuff. And I would like them to get a little bit more of a sense of how we've laid things out, and that there's kind of a thought process behind it. Whether they choose to enter that space or engage in that space is totally up to them.
Iris Goldman, I completely agree with you that most people are too lazy to use QR codes. It takes time. People don't, it's not that it's really complex, it's just that people aren't typically going to pull their phone out of their pocket and scan the code and wait for the thing to load. I honestly think that iBeacons are a QR code killer, and you can quote me on that. I really feel that that's a technology, and I'm sorry if you guys are using QR codes a lot, but go the route of iBeacons. It takes the little bit of complexity that is there for the user with QR codes is gone with the iBeacons. So it'll get around there, but at least at Penn State, I haven't seen a whole lot of adoption about QR codes, and we've surveyed students, and most of them don't even really know what it is. So we're not super confident in that. And with the iBeacons, you don't need to know what it is. It just sort of works. Okay, so it enables wayfinding audio only. Dan talked about this already a little bit. We want people looking at the pieces of artwork. We don't want people to be fussing around with an app. So we wanted to make sure that there was an audio-only way of doing this. So again, put the earbuds in, put the device in the pocket, and then you have somebody that's like a docent that's actually in your pocket, a docent in your pocket. Maybe we should rename the app, a docent in the pocket. That could sort of talk to you as you're walking around. And again, you can walk around non-linearly. You can go from place to place however you want to do it. And that person that's speaking to you is providing interesting anecdotes and relevant content and wayfinding content for you.
Although I will say that when you see the sort of pilot project, there is actually a way to go through this exhibition that makes a bit more space. So we do recommend people going a particular direction. And I think we've all had that experience where, there's this great exhibition, it's laid out, it's beautiful, and the way that it makes the most sense is to go to your right rather than your left or whatever. And 75% of the population will go one way, but 25% will go on the other way.
Yeah.
There also, we can get into that, but the content is actually written, and it comes up on your phone. You don't have to look at it, but it does come up.
Mm-hmm. So there was an accessibility issue there that we needed to make sure that we had lots of different ways of delivering the content. So about that sort of that wayfinding and that ordering of the content, I mean, one of the things for me that I found really interesting, again, getting that tour from Dana for that first time, was that I didn't realize the sort of conceptual linkages between the different areas of the particular exhibit or the different paintings. So that was interesting to me to get that sort of tour from her and taking her around in the order, and the whole experience meant more to me, and I came away with a lot more, and all that stuff kind of connected together in my head better. So that, again, without a docent having you walk around with you, this is trying to deliver some, to some amount of that sort of experience. The last design decision before I move on to the next slide was just that we wanted to have a cohesive user experience. And what I mean by that is we didn't want to just have, okay, here's an isolated piece of information about this painting, now I move on, here's another isolated piece about this. When we walked into this, which we'll talk about a little bit more, this window on the west exhibit, we wanted people to sort of get into the mood of that particular exhibit. So in addition to the content that was being delivered and the narration, we also wanted to have some sort of ambient environmental stuff going on that continued throughout the experience to bring it all together for people. And I think, and again, I think that kind of like establishes this sort of cohesive experience. Okay, I need to jump to the next slide.
Okay.
He's typing. We're both operating off of one computer here. Okay. So this is one of the screens for the app. Again, we shouldn't get too hung up on the visual portion of this, but it was kind of hard. I didn't want to have a slide that just had a little like earbud on it, because that's most of the way that the content is being delivered. This is the visual portion of it. Again, as I mentioned, there's sort of an ambient aspect to this. So the first thing you'll notice is this beautiful picture in the background. In the lower right corner, you see a little speaker button. So what's happening as you walk into this space is you're getting this kind of like nice background Western music, and then this image that sort of brings everything together. And that is sort of continuous as you move around. And then that place in the middle is delivering content that's relevant to the thing you're most close to. And then in terms of that nonlinear place, you get that second little box down there has things that you've recently been by. So you can jump back if you saw something that was interesting, or you wanted to read up on something that you saw before to make a connection to the thing that you're looking at now. You can do that through kind of going back through the history or the things that are also nearby you.
I'm just going to go. I'll let you know.
Okay. We're tag teaming the computer here. Okay, so the second screen is the sort of detailed screen. Again, really, really simple. The content is at the forefront. Following basic Apple design principles, the content goes all the way to the edge. So all we have here, and this is typical for this particular pilot, we got a big image, takes up most of the screen so you can really get in and see details. This doesn't have to be a picture of what you're looking at right now. It could also be a picture of something that's related to what you're looking at now. You got the audio, so you can start and stop that if you want to. If your device display is turned off, the audio and all this stuff is going to happen automatically, so you don't have to hit play to start it. It's just going to be playing, and the next thing is going to play as you get to that. But if you're looking at the screen as you're walking around, you get all this other kind of nice extra stuff as well. So that's it. That is the entire app. It's simple. It's really complex. Trust me, I've been building this app myself for the last 6 months. It's way more complex than it looks on the surface. But the thing that the user interacts with is really, really straightforward. One other important piece of information about this is that I didn't want to be the person that ran the technology as well as the person that maintained all the content. So we built a CMS, and the idea here in the long term is to hand control of this over to the Palmer Museum so that docents can go in there and update the content. So we don't need to switch out the beacons. The beacons stay in place. They're part of the infrastructure of the space, but we can attach different content to it. So as these sort of rotating exhibits happen, we can attach new content to it. Next time a patron comes in, they get delivered that new content. Their stuff gets updated. And it's really sort of easy to control for non-technical people to add text, audio, and images to these different beacons, and actually do a lot of things that are pretty advanced beyond just adding the content in there. They can control how big of a space that the beacons sort of transmit, so they can kind of tighten things up and make a really tighter responsiveness to the beacons. I'll show you a little bit how that works in a second. There's a lot of advanced things that they can do to control the type of experience that users are having as they're walking around. And in the end, I mentioned this before, what the end product is really like one of these audio tour guide things with the buttons that you type stuff in, but it's way more advanced than that and much more automatic, and I think more of a pleasing experience for patrons walking around.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the pilot project. Of course, once we had the discussions about iBeacons, we started talking about how we could apply it, and we thought, let's start small, and we are going to check it out with this Windows on the West exhibition, which is something that the museum, was already planning on having. And the other reason that I liked it is it's pretty simple, but like I said earlier, it's the kind of exhibition that you really should go in a particular way in order to make sense. So Windows on the West is essentially a special exhibition that will be here for the summer. It is loosely divided into 3 themes. The person who, Mr. Phelan, who collected all of these works of art, basically wanted sort of overall to present a version of the West that has not been presented sort of historically. This is not cowboys and Indians, and this is not the Lone Ranger. What he wanted to present was something a little more sophisticated and a little more refined in terms of the subject matter. And so he basically divided the exhibition into 3 themes. And the first one is called Natural Beauty, Natural Wonder, which is essentially these images of the American West. Oh, that's right. Thank you. That exist to sort of entice people from the East to come visit or move to the West, basically to lure potential settlers with these beautiful depictions of open spaces and these geological formations. You'll see like geysers and things like that, that were quite foreign to the people who were living in the East. Oh, sorry, I need to do this again. The second section that he used was called Western Settlement and Development, and so basically it basically showed people sort of establishing some presence, this frontier life, and tried to basically assure them, you can come here, you can be in this land. It's a little bit exotic, but there are still some of the luxuries that you are already accustomed to, and that there's some security in coming here. And so this section essentially shows very small settlements on these Western landscapes. And then the third section is, and this, just sort of an interesting FYI, this painting used to belong to Andy Warhol. But this section is called Images and Icons, and it basically documents Native Americans who were already, they're out of copyright. They're old enough, so essentially this shows these Native American communities and basically how their lives have been altered by the sort of incoming presence of these folks. And yeah, Peggy, I actually, they are out of copyright, and because I have the information about the exhibits development group and what collection they're in, we're definitely in the clear, but you're right, I certainly checked on that before we started. So essentially, he really wanted this, Mr. Thielen wanted this to be viewed as this sort of diverse visual anthology of westward expansion. And he really wanted people to be aware of these sort of social, political, and economic contexts. But I thought that, using, maybe what we could do with this is give people not only a welcome when they got to the museum, but also make sure that people were aware of the exhibition, that they got information, just very brief information about the exhibition when they walked in, encouraging them to go a particular way, and then as they walked through, they would be greeted about information about each one of these sections as they walked through. And so essentially, I worked with Chris and one of his colleagues named Ben. So if I refer to Ben, Ben is not here, but Ben was a big part of this. So basically, as we were installing the exhibition, they came in, saw this space. As the exhibition went up, all these little lines here, the gray areas, those are walls that have been installed in order to delineate the sections. So you can see, basically they came into an empty room, and then they came in when the walls were up, and we went through very purposefully and looked at how the exhibition was laid out and where the best place for each iBeacon would be given the way that it was installed.
Yep. I should add that there's 2 other spaces that aren't represented on this map. There's a beacon at the front of the museum, and there's a beacon at the stairs. Those infamous stairs that we mentioned people don't see and don't realize there's more stuff upstairs. So ideally, if people have the app, they walk into the museum, they get a nice introduction of generally of the museum and what's available. As they get closer to that stairway, and the window on the west exhibit is right up at the top of those stairs, so they are reminded that there's interesting special exhibitions at the top of the stairs. That cues them to go up the stairs, and then once they get to the top and they sort of enter the space, they get that introduction, that red area, that introductory materials. How many beacons in all? I'll show a screen in a second here, but there's about 6 areas, and then we have additional beacons to get more sort of signal coverage. And again, they're cheap, so we can do that. We can really define regions that respond to the user the way that we really want. And this gets to what I was talking about with the ability for the docents to really control the type of content and when it gets delivered and that sort of thing. So
right. Okay.
So that's just that particular exhibit. Again, I think that we'll if this goes well, sort of expand this throughout the museum. So that's just that exhibit, but there'll be more space.
Okay.
So
we'll talk about that in just one sec.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, as you can see here, there is overlap. Right, as you can see, basically what this is representing, these two blue circles is a single beacon. And a single beacon, as you would imagine, projects out a signal in a sphere around it, and it gets weaker as it gets farther away. The one thing that's not really accurate about this is that there's attenuation happening now, which is basically signal bouncing. So the beacons that are up against the wall are actually not going to project so well through that wall. They're going to bounce off that wall. So like 1.3 here in the middle isn't actually projecting behind. It's actually just projecting forward. And there's ways that we can actually use the spaces to sort of control how the signal gets kind of bounced around the space to create the signal, what we call a geofence, which is basically the area that the app responds to, the shape that we want it. But while there is signal overlap, that's okay because I can also tell how far away I am from the beacon. So as you can see maybe as an example of 1, 3, and 2, as I move away from 1, 3, it's still going to be the closest thing to me, but as I walk towards 2, I'm going to get farther away from 1, 3. And once I cross that halfway point, the app is suddenly going to say, you're slightly closer to 2 than you are to 1, 3, therefore give me the content that's associated with 2. So while there's lots of overlap, and that's actually good because it gives us 100% coverage, and the only way to have full coverage with circles is to have overlap, that's okay because what I'm responding to with the app is just the closest thing. There are directional beacons actually. Some people do sell directional beacons. They're a little bit more expensive, but all they do is stick the beacon inside of a little metal shape that bounces the signal in a particular direction. So it's not anything different than what we're doing with walls. So this was tricky. So this was a big part of the sort of design process, collaborative design process with us, was to ensure that the signal was bouncing around in the space in the way that we wanted it to. And there was a lot of controlling the strength of the beacon tower transmission, moving the beacons around so that we got the bounce that we wanted, and just sort of playing around with that. And that took a couple of weeks to get it the way we want. We still don't have it perfect, but we're getting better at it. And the app does a good job of signal processing and trying to ignore anomalous things that happen. So yes, beacons actually, you can actually get into the hardware for the beacons and adjust the strength. So if you want to tighten up that circle quite a bit, if you wanted people, and this is something we've actually talked about, was shore up that circle quite a bit so that the app is only responding to a particular painting when you walk right up to that painting, and it doesn't respond outside of that. So we can define smaller circles. Our initial idea was to do full coverage so that you were getting something all the time when you were walking around, but we don't necessarily have to do that in the long term. Do you use phone compasses or accelerometers in the app? No, that's a really good question, and that may be like a version 2 feature, is to do a little bit, take advantage of some of the hardware capabilities a little bit more to orient people. Because right now, I can tell how close I am, but if for 1.3, if I said I'm 1 meter away from 1.3, all I know that I'm somewhere within a circle that's 1.3 meters away, or 1 meter away from beacon 1.3. With a compass, I could tell which direction I was facing, which would be useful. But I'm not really actually sure how well a compass app works inside of an older building at the Plumber Museum. So in any case, so that's sort of the setup, what we built. And I want to talk about some pilot outcomes, and I want to talk about some outcomes right now. We're still early phases of this, so we're still collecting outcomes, and certainly as we move forward, we'll probably end up writing some papers or white papers or some articles somewhere about this, because it's really been a fascinating process. It's a limited rollout, so we haven't released it to the general public quite yet, but we've released it to groups of people that are friends of the museum, and have them going through and using this space and giving us feedback. So it's a fairly small group of people, but quickly expanding. I think in the next week or two we'll do more of a general sort of rollout of this and start promoting this more widely. So that's the first outcome. Second outcome, or observation, I guess, about the pilot was when people use this for the first time, and again, we tell them, just download the app, get the content, plop it in your pocket, put your headphones in, and just walk into the museum. And almost without fail, we get these startled reactions, like, how the heck did that work? So it's sort of like magic in a way, because they can't see the signals, they can't see the beacons, but it is delivering the right thing to them as they walk around. So that's kind of neat. It's almost like sort of somebody, a docent, sort of following you around and helping you out. So that's neat, and that's a good thing for me as a technology designer and an educational technologist to have that type of reaction. It's pleasant sort of startled reaction. It was kind of neat. Context-driven user experience is tricky. That's an interesting thing. A way of looking at technology design that's context-driven is a totally different way to think about interfaces, because again, as I mentioned this earlier, it's the non-interface interface. The user isn't explicitly clicking on the thing that they want to view at any particular moment. The content is delivered by context, by them walking around. So instead of clicking, they're walking. That's the control. So how do you design interfaces for that? How do you not unintendedly deliver content to people when they don't want it? And that was an early bit of feedback that Dan and I got when we were taking people through the museum with this, was they would sort of wander around and they'd be listening to something, and then something else would pop up, and that was an unintended sort of effect. We wanted people to be able to listen through. Even if they walked away from a particular area, we wanted them to be able to listen through the audio. They might still be interested in it, and then give some kind of cue that that new stuff was available, and to play that when it was appropriate. So there's the interesting thing that you have to think about when the experience is driven by the person walking around.
Let's see.
Tiny beacons equals happy facilities managers. These things are easy to hide. In a place that's really concerned with the appearance of the facility, like a museum, it's easier to get these facilities managers. I'm not sure what they call it in the museum talk.
Well, yeah, facility managers. But we don't actually have a facility manager. We have a registrar, and basically, director of curatorial staff. But yeah, tiny beacons really, they're unobtrusive for everybody, and it's really easy to stick them just about anywhere. And it sounds kind of silly, but I did ask our registrar if there was any way that Bluetooth technology might be damaging to paintings. And I think I think Chris, I asked him the same question. There was this sort of smile, but yeah, I have to ask, right? But no, they can really be stuck just about anywhere, and they are so unobtrusive that sort of adds to that whole user experience where you know that they're coming, but you don't necessarily know where they are. It's really funny. Our senior preparator asked if we should indicate which works of art have some sort of iBeacon technology around them or near them, And it just made me smile because really that's beside the point. You don't necessarily want them, they don't need to know where they are. They're coming up where they belong. Bobby, no, they are. Okay.
So I guess another expansion of that is there are beacons that actually are powered. We chose to not go that direction because that would require, we needed to have a ton of flexibility in the placement of these beacons. As I mentioned in that previous slide, this placement was the optimal geographical placement of these beacons to get the experience that we wanted. If we had to put these things where there's outlets, then we wouldn't be able to achieve the experience that we want. So the battery powered gave us the flexibility. In the long term, we might go a different route. But again, the beacon's batteries in a good modern beacon lasts about a year or two. So there doesn't have to be a lot of switching out of batteries at this point because they're so low powered. So I mentioned some of the limitations, but this is one of our outcomes that we sort of realized is that you have to design around the limitations of technology as well as physics. And we can change technology, but we can't change physics. There are limitations to the consistency of the signal that these things delivered, which creates some anomalous results. The battery life sometimes is better in some beacons than others. And then also physics. The reality is that whatever the material that the walls and ceiling and floor are made out of is going to affect that attenuation of that signal, the bouncing of the signal. So you have to contend with that. And it's just sort of a design process and experimentation and testing process that you need to go through to deal with those things. But and if any of you guys have any sort of omnipotent control over physics, I'd really like to apply that power in the Palmer. We'll pay for it. So I think the last one is what I think Dan and I, both of our goals here, is not for this to be the like we're going to roll this out to the entire university all at once, but really to convince the administration for the museum through one small-scale, really well-done pilot that this has potential for the museum. And maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, and so we are in conversation about the different kinds of technologies that best fit our particular situation, and we wanted to do this pilot and show it to everybody else on the staff so that they could kind of see what it was like. And everybody so far has been very, very responsive and really excited about it. So at this point, are you ready to go? Are you ready to go further with some of those things we're thinking about?
Sure.
Yeah. So at this point, after we still have a few tweaks to make. Do we want to answer this? We didn't seem to have that problem, but
do people walk around and block the signal? A little bit, probably, yeah. But I think that there's enough bouncing around in the signal to make up for that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Leah, not yet. For me, this particular technology is definitely about having some sort of context and directions on way to go. I can say, though, that during the time that we spent with people who were exploring this did not stop them from engaging with one another. And I mean, I think we could sort of have an entirely different conversation about multitasking, but once people got the information, and again, it's short, once people got the information about where they were and got what they needed to know, they continued to talk with one another. So number one, I'm not too concerned about whether or not it discourages social engagement because I think that people are going to use the technology the way they're going to use it. But also, I think in the very brief things that we've seen, it didn't in fact discourage anybody. And interestingly enough, maybe this bothered this particular group. I kept talking to them while we were going, asking for feedback, and they could hear me talking to them too. So. Yeah,
and I will say again, social interaction was part of the conversation from day one about this technology, and I think that once that Wi-Fi is established in the museum space, it's really, really easy for us to add, in addition to that audio, video, audio, textual, image content, we can add web pages or other things, or the ability to tweet out. One of the things that we had talked about, the experience that we wanted to have when we initially were bouncing ideas around, was sort of like a graffiti wall for the space, so that you could sort of leave your mark in the virtual layer, in the virtual world, on the space, and then other people that came by could see that graffiti and add to it. So that's kind of kind of fun. You kind of do some time shifting there, like a time shifted asynchronous social experience that's embedded in a virtual layer on in the museum, and that enables people to not actually have to graffiti the walls, which would be a terrible
yeah,
thing.
it would be a terrible thing. So at this point, I think that we're all pretty on board with this. I'm really interested in seeing, we have not finished the pilot. The exhibition actually is up until August, and so we're going to continue to work with small groups and get feedback from them about what this does or doesn't do for their experiences. The last group that we worked with is a pretty savvy group of graduate and undergraduate students, and they were all really excited. And I think a little bit surprised at sort of what they were experiencing, and they had a lot of good feedback for things that they would like to see in the museum. For example, and yesterday during our staff meeting, we were talking about the possibility of highlighting recent acquisitions. I would like to see a beacon in each gallery so that people have this is the gallery that you're in, and this is what you're going to see here. Just a couple of sentences, not anything huge. But then I also thought it would be great if we could use this when we have new portions of our collection come up. We just opened a small gallery of decorative glass. Contemporary art glass. It would be really great for us to be able to put a beacon over there and say, you are approaching this new section, and here's a little bit of information about it. So I think that there are loads of, you're really limited only by your imagination on the possible applications, but of course you just have to kind of figure out what's best for your institution. There's virtual graffiti, not really graffiti.
Yeah. The beacons just transmit, and they have a little bit of data package that goes out with them. So.
Well, and this is another really, I think, important thing to say. When you're using iBeacons, this was one of my first questions was, okay, so if we are asking people to come to a particular location where there are works of art that are under copyright, then we're not going to be able to include anything. And that is actually not necessarily true, because the Bluetooth, the Old Economy Village, no, you can't turn them off, but you could have people just turn off their Bluetooth and it won't come up. So for the copyright issue, so you actually, none of this is stored on your device, so the copyright issue is not applicable.
Yeah, you only see the content when you're in the museum. When you're not in the museum, you don't have any ability to see the content outside of the space. So I think that falls within the restrictions of they bought the license to display it in that space, and people are only going to get it when they're in that space.
Not yet.
So we can do analytics for that's sort of part of what we're doing, but at this point we aren't doing it actively, but that capability is in there to do the analytics. Basically what happens is every time that app ranges a beacon, when you get in range of a beacon, it knows and it can send that data off. Again, we have this problem with no Wi-Fi, so that two-way communication is problematic, but it's something that's in the app. It's just not really enabled right now.
Stacy, another thing that we did at the beginning of a calendar year in January, we put 2 iPad stations outside of areas of the gallery and asked people about their user experience for the museum, who they were, sort of demographic information, where they went, how much they considered that they interacted with the spaces, and whether or not the information was as much or less than they were interested in having. And so we've actually been gathering information about sort of visitor behavior since January, and this will be another sort of nice component to add once we get a little further with it.
Okay, and our last slide is just sort of a general Penn State-wide plans for this, and I guess our plans for global domination. Our kind of semi-immediate plan is to make this more widely available, make more beacon-enabled spaces throughout Penn State. And again, that's to sort of provide additional value to students to make them want to download this. And we hope that there's a point where we have sort of a critical mass of interest, so that students we might partner with the campus eateries, for instance, to get coupons or deliver menus for the day. If there's a changing menu, we might want to deliver that as a student walks into an eatery. And they might get it for that, which is a more immediate interest to them. And they might not really be interested in what happens in the classroom, but they get it for that. And then it's the same app, again, because of this flexibility of the CMS and then giving people different access to it, then we can start to say, well, this other classroom building is Beacon enabled, so let's develop some interactive experiences. There's something else going on Beacon powered that's keyed off. So the students might have got it for a different reason, knowing that there's other things that might be delivered. And then as they walk into that classroom, they're a freshman, it's their first day, they got the app during orientation, they walk into the classroom for the first day, and it says, welcome to Biology 101, why don't you tell us something about yourself, and then enable some kind of social experience, and that just sort of happens.
What is the rest?
No.
Thanks.
So there's no point in accessing the app right now because the app doesn't do anything unless you're in a Beacon-enabled space at Penn State.
Yeah.
So it'll roll out bigger. So if you come to Penn State, you'll get to access the experience. Sweet. Well, reach out to us. We'll be happy to take you on a tour.
I also tweeted both Chris and I's information on Twitter, so you can get a hold of us via email, via Twitter, really any way. Yep.
So the long-term, more in thinking in the future plans, once we are really happy with the stability and robustness of this technology, the long-term plan is for us to make this more widely available. And I'm going to type in another piece of technology that myself and my group developed, which is called the One Button Studio. Some of you might have heard of this. It's a really neat, streamlined way to run a video studio at your institution. You can get access to this right now. You download it and set them up in your space, and we have all kinds of guides. That's the sort of model we expect to have at Penn State Places. So there's the app, there's the CMS. We'll release all that stuff for you guys so you can start to build these types of experiences in your own spaces. And there might be some consulting that would be required to set it up because you really need to learn from the experiences that we have. I mean, we've taken months to figure out some of the quirks in this that we'd need to tell you. But in the long term, really what our hope is to have all museums that want to take advantage of this stuff have this available to them, and then other campuses if they want to do other things with it. But those are all things that we really want to.
There you go. Are you team away?
Yeah. And so it'll be available, and we think for free. That we're not really like a cost recovery unit, so we're happy to sort of give this away to people. So thank you very much. If you guys have any other questions, tweet us, email us. I think that I actually have. Nope. I guess that didn't make it in.
The very first one.
Reach out through the Future Museums Conference to get our email addresses. I'm Chris Millay at psu.edu. And
I'm just dck10@psu.edu.
So I guess I could just type that in. Yeah, so any other kind of real quick questions? We have 2 more minutes.
10. Ready to go to lunch.
Yeah. It is not after lunch and everybody's sleepy, but.
Oh, that's true.
We're not doing open source right now, but that's certainly a possibility.
Jordan, do you mean where he bought the beacons?
The beacons that we're using right now are Gimbal, type it in. We developed the app ourselves. It's all in-house code and being delivered through an Apple Enterprise license. So it's all internal right now.
But again, we're gonna share it.
No, I spent my wife and 1-year-old daughter will attest. I spent many evenings and weekends working on this. Good. I'm glad you guys enjoyed the presentation, and I guarantee you'll be hearing more about this as we have more to share.
Thanks so much.
Probably about 9 months ago, and just had a kind of general conversation about ways that we can introduce technologies. What are some of the new emerging technologies that might sort of be game changers for the museum experience? And we bounced a lot of ideas around, and I'd actually selected, which works pretty well, I think, an iBooks-based, an iBook that delivered some really interesting sort of supplementary content for the museum. And it was sort of designed to be working on an iPad, and people could take that through the museum as they were kind of enjoying the space. Is there anything else you want to say about that particular?
Yeah, so for conversations with Chris, essentially two different kinds of projects emerged, and one of them was sort of an interpretive iBook. And I'm really interested in the notion of people curating their own experiences in the museum and then being able to share those socially. One of our biggest issues is that the museum, like a lot of museums unfortunately, is not wired yet. The campus has a campaign right now for universal wireless access, and we'll be part of that. So we should be wired next year, which is another reason why I'm sort of in love with this iBeacons thing. The content for that takes a lot of time because we selected works of art from each gallery that we're basically giving sort of interpretive information biographs that we don't have. So we essentially have been working together for several years and have really started working more closely together over the last year.
Great. And again, my name is Chris Millay. I'm the Assistant Director for Education Technology Services at Penn State. And our role is part of central IT, so we look at new and emerging technologies, we research those technologies and partner with folks like Palmer Museum and Dana to roll out these technologies and do lots of evaluation to determine if they're having the type of educational impact that we're really sort of seeking out. So that partnership has sort of had this particular application of iBeacons came about. I think the way to get started here is to turn it over to Dana to give a quick introduction to the Palmer Museum of Art. That's the location in question here.
All right, I just wanted to tell you a few little things about the museum because museums are such unique and sort of location-specific spaces. The museum was built in 1972 and basically started out with a few hundred objects, I think, that had been collected on campus. And we had a remodel in 1993, and so we're much larger at this point. We're primarily an American art institution with works of art from about 1800 to the present. And then we also have some pretty nice collections in Southern and Northern Baroque, contemporary ceramics, Japanese prints, and then we do special exhibitions throughout the year, about 9 special exhibitions per year. And one of the things I really wanted to sort of cover so that it's probably easier to understand why I was so interested in this technology is that we are on the University Park campus with, 40,000 students?
43,000.
And most of the students who are walking around have iPhones. If they don't have iPhones, they certainly have some sort of smartphone, but for the vast majority of them, they are iPhones. So when adopting this technology, I was thinking about 3 main audiences that we serve, which is K through 12 audiences, university audiences, and the general public. But in this particular instance, I was definitely thinking of our university audiences the most. Thank you, Peggy, for posting that. So when Chris and I started talking about the museum and what we do, I was most interested in using this as some sort of way to reach out to students first. And then I think as we go on, we'll see a little bit more about what we can do to make sure that this serves all of our audiences.
So Dana and I got together. I have a record button here.
Recording started.
All right. Okay, thank you everyone for coming, and I hope you're having a great conference so far. My name is Chris Millay, and I'm joined by
Dana Carlisle Kletchka.
And we're going to be here talking about iBeacons. There we go, is our first slide. iBeacons in the museum. This is going to be a pretty informal session, I think, so I enabled audio for everybody, so if you want to jump in and go ahead and ask us any kind of questions, you can do that, or just send it in the chat window. We hope to make this fairly conversational. Also, we can go as technical as we want with this. We can go as deep into the museum side of this as you want. Dana and I both sort of cover those two sides of the picture. So, we're just going to try to make this meet as much of your expectations as we possibly can. So, do you want to do a full sort of introduction of yourself?
Let's see, I'm the Curator of Education at the Palmer Museum of Arts. And I also teach a little bit and have been interested in digital technology and sort of applications for social media and technology in the museum for several years now. And I feel really lucky that I am, working at Penn State with people like Chris, because while the museum has a lot of content, people like Chris have a lot of expertise, identical information, and then information that people can share with other people, and hashtags so that they can create their own sort of experiences. But with iBeacons, which emerged a little bit later, the reason that I thought they were so wonderful is I envisioned them as a way of assisting wayfinding or being able to orient people to the space of the museum. It's hard to tell, but we actually have I'll answer that in just a sec. We actually have 2 floors on the museum that have works of art in them, and in my experience working with students and with the public, I've noted that there are a lot of people who don't realize that you can go up the 2nd floor stairwell, and that's sort of mortifying. So I viewed the iBeacons as a way of orienting people to the space, letting them know what was available, where they could go, and giving them very brief information about the areas that they're walking into. In terms of teaching people about hashtags, they're actually part of the iBooks, and I don't think that we'll need to teach people about them because mostly the people who are using them are university students, and they already know about hashtags.
So we mentioned iBeacons a bunch of times. This technology, and I'll get into what exactly it is if you don't know. Yeah. Okay,
here we go.
We'll get into it, trust me. So